Hi, welcome back to Quick Draw Mods. This is install tutorial number 3. Tutorial 1, we went over how to disassemble a controller and everything that you needed. Tutorial 2, I showed you the directionality and proper placement for the chip, or at least where I like to install it. That's the most out of the way place right here on the right hand portion of the controller, right next to the bottom thumbstick. A little bit of hot glue. The notch in the chip that you see you shouldn't be able to see it. It should be underneath and facing towards you, not towards the triggers up on the top of the controller. So the notch is technically down here, glued with the rest of the chip underneath. That way we can have the chip properly installed and we know where the wires go, and you could follow the schematic a little bit more easily on where each wire goes. The first wire we installed was the LED. It goes from the LED to the second pin from the bottom on the left hand side. Then the pin underneath, which is the bottom pin on the left hand side, is your power. Single wire that goes across to the power point. Be careful not to bridge with the soldering point next to it. If you bridge, your controller will not turn on because you'll end up giving power to a different portion of the controller that shouldn't have power, and you could potentially harm your controller. The third wire is directly across. It's the pin underneath. On the right hand side, it's the first pin. That's your ground wire. It comes to this ground point on the other side, and that's your ground for the controller. Without the ground, the chip will not turn on. You can't harm your controller if this wire comes off, but if you ground it to the wrong place, you can possibly harm your controller. The next pin is right above the ground wire. I did a short little wire to the middle soldering point here for the right trigger. It's all wire because it's a CG controller, so wire from the pin to the pin. And then the next wire above that is your left trigger rapid fire pin. I basically soldered it to the pin, wrapped the wire underneath the board behind the two rumble motor clips, safety clips, and then up the other side. You don't want to cover this hole here, so make sure the wire comes up and solder it to this point here. And you might have some extra wire. It might be really, really long. We don't want to cover this hole either with the wire, because when you put it back together, a screw goes in here and you could potentially cut your wire. So once you're installed and you're tight, just take this wire and kind of let's pick it up and tuck it behind the rechargeable battery pack clip. If you happen to have a ton of extra wire where you pull it up and it's kind of like this, and it's really loose, just kind of hold it, make it tight, pull it up as high as you can, take your hot glue gun and just put some glue to hold it in place. That way it's nice and tight and it doesn't flop around when you reassemble your controller. Now, we did every soldering point except for the last one, because the last one, in my opinion, is the hardest soldering point on the CG. It's this center pin here on the sync button. You don't want to bridge the pins with solder, or else your sync button will automatically be in sync mode forever and you'll never be able to sync your controller or use your controller properly. So we want to solder to that center point. I'm going to show you my method for doing it. It works for me pretty well. For those of you that have really fine soldering tips and know what you're doing, you should be good. For those of you that are beginners, this is an intermediate solder point. I hope that you don't screw up your controller. If you do, or if you actually get some solder and glob it in between those points, get some desolder braid, lay it across, and use the desolder braid to remove the solder, so that your three pins are individual again, and try again. You should be able to get it if you follow my method. So here's my method. I solder it to the pin. I kind of just get my wiring all lined up. I want to make sure that when I hold it down, that the wire is flat against the board, so that when I push that exposed wire at the tip, it kind of lines up with that center point. If it's good, which it should be, get some solder and kind of just grease up or pre-tin the wire itself. If you've got a really fine tip, you might want to even try to pre-tin the center point. Okay. So now that you're all lined up, slide that wire up. Make sure that you're exactly on that center soldering point. Looks flush, flat against the board. Now take your soldering iron and just kind of get it in there. Sometimes it sticks right away, other times it doesn't. This is very hard to do on camera. I usually am right up in there with this. Excuse me for taking it out of frame. I just want to make sure it's on. Okay. I feel pretty secure about it. I mean, you don't want to pull too toughly. And just kind of rub your finger down the wire. Feels like it's on there. You're good. Well, we can test it real quick. There's two ways to test it. You're going to need your controller, front controller. Just take your board, lay it back in. Now, if you're using a AA battery pack, you are going to have to put the back cover back on so that you can stick it in, try to turn it on and test it. I don't use AA's. I like to use a rechargeable battery pack. There are 4 pins here and 6 pins here. Obviously, the pin on the right-hand side and the left-hand side of the battery pack does not touch anything. So, just kind of stick it on there, hold it in place. Your controller will turn on. Press the sync button once. If that quadrant 4 comes on, you know your chip is installed correctly. Just give it a quick push. It's blinking. That means that the sync button's hooked up right. That means that 4 of your 6 wires are definitely correct at this point. If you hold it, it goes into sync mode. You hold it again, it comes out of sync mode, so you know your sync works. Just push it, it blinks, you know it's good. If it's doing that, you know for a fact that your power, your ground, your LED, and your sync wire are all correct. 4 out of the 6 are correct, or 4 out of 5 if you're doing a 3 mode. The only way to actually check to make sure that the right and left triggers are soldered correctly is to sync it to your Xbox with a game and make sure that they rapid fire. Or use the dashboard spin test, which is another one of my videos. It shows you on the 3 mode how to spin it. The dashboard spin test is only done with the right trigger. It does work with the left trigger too when you're in mode 4 for dual trigger rapid fire. So now that we're all hooked up, I like to take a little bit of hot glue and kind of just put it right underneath the sync button where I soldered. Kind of holds that wire in place. And I also like to put some hot glue on the LED one. And we're good. Lastly, once the hot glue dries, you don't want your wire across any of these pads or any hot glue on these pads, or else your pads won't work. Those are where the buttons push them. So we're just going to kind of take the wire and we're going to push it out of the way, bend it out of the way so that it's not on the pad. It could be on the pad slightly. As long as it's not across the pad, you're good. So I'm going to end this tutorial video here. I'm going to also use a little bit of hot glue down here to hold the wire in place. I'm going to end this tutorial video here, and we'll do one more for reassembly and go over everything one more time. So, thanks for watching.